Welcome to the Emerald City Sportscast.
Wilson, it as he throws deep downfield. It's going to be caught by Metcalf for the touchdown.
Hosted by longtime Northwest sports journalist Dan Viennes.
Here's the drive deep to left. He has done it again. Wow. Kyle Lewis, 3 games, 3 home runs. Mariners have a 5-2 lead.
Brought to you by Hollywood and Vine's Recording Studio. World-class audio recording right in the heart of the Woodinville Winery District.
Wide receivers to either side. Russell takes the snap, drops back. He's going to throw down the middle. He's got a man. The ball is caught.
Game over, baby.
Touchdown. The game is over. The Seahawks are going back to the Super Bowl.
And now, broadcasting live from the Dan Cave Studios, here's your host, Dan Viennes.
All right, you guys, welcome into the live stream, the Emerald City Sportscast. I am your host, Dan Viennes, on this 20th day of January, 2021. It is a historic day in many ways. I was hoping it would be a historic day in another way. So since the launch of the 365 Sportscast Network 3 weeks ago, I have had all sorts of issues going live. The first week, it was my internet service. Last week, it was the power being blown out by a big windstorm. This week, it was out of my hands. It was an actual technical issue with the radio.co website itself that we use to host our network. So, but I can bring it to you, the show I had planned for you this way, and it'll be posted as the podcast. Make sure to subscribe on all podcast channels and platforms to the Emerald City Sportscast, as well as archived on the 365 Sportscast Network. Also, stay tuned for news in the next couple of days. The iPhone app for the 365 Sportscast Network should be ready any day now. What do I have on tap for you today? Well, we've got some things to talk about. I bet you could probably guess a couple of the subjects. We're going to talk a lot of Seahawks Offensive Coordinator job search. I'll give you my thoughts on what really is going on with the Seahawks Offensive Coordinator search. I'll unveil my new top 3 candidates wish list, as well, as unrealistic as it may still be. And then I'll tell you what I think is actually going to happen. Just trying to connect dots, read the tea leaves, read between lines, and some new news that's come out in the last 6 or 7 hours that may shed some light on that as well. I'll tell you what I think ultimately is going to happen despite all of the noise. We're going to talk some baseball today as well, as we're just a month away from the start of spring training. Jerry Dipoto talked to reporters this week for the Mariners. I'll go over some of the highlights of that and talk about what he meant by some of the things he said, and more praise for the Mariners farm system coming down this week as well. We will get into that. But first, let's look at this week's local headlines.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
And now, here's today's headlines, brought to you by FreeBets, the newest online sports betting comparison site. Check them out at freebets.us. Thanks again to the folks over at freebets.us. Check them out. They compare all the betting websites so that you can make the most informed decision. In local headlines this week, lots of changes in the NFC West. It could affect the Seahawks in 2021. It's kind of the lead story this week. In addition to the 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh taking the head coaching job in New York with the Jets. That happened a few days ago. The Rams this week also lose their defensive coordinator as Brandon Staley gets the job across town. Doesn't have to move. Kind of cool for him. Takes the job as a head coach of the Chargers. Kind of a surprise hire there. Everybody thought they were going to go offense to support Justin Herbert. Brian Daboll was kind of figured as one of the favorite names there, but it ends up being Staley. Already reports out of L.A., though, that Raheem Morris, who filled in as interim head coach in Atlanta after Dan Quinn was fired, is expected to replace Staley in Los Angeles. I saw it said on Twitter this week that that's good news because Russell Wilson and the Seahawks have had success consistently against Raheem Morris coached defenses. I don't know that Raheem Morris has ever had the kind of talent on hand, though, that he will find with the Rams. Mariners general manager Jerry Dipoto, as I said, spoke to reporters this week. I'm going to get much deeper into that later in the show. But one piece of great news to come out of that session is that Mitch Haniger is finally 100% healthy and full go on baseball activities. The Mariners played the entire 2021 season, truncated as it was, without Haniger, as he struggled to come back from neck and back injuries. The former All-Star on track to be the starter in right field on opening day next to Rookie of the Year Kyle Lewis in center. Who's the left fielder going to be? We don't quite know yet. We'll get into some of that a little bit later. And the Seahawks Offensive Coordinator search continues into its second full week. Most of the news is about names not involved in the search any longer. Reports indicate that Doug Peterson is inclined to take a year off from coaching and then jump back in and pursue head coaching opportunities in 2022. And quarterback coach Mike Kafka reportedly staying put in Kansas City, even if offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy does not land a head coaching job elsewhere. Both Peterson and Kafka were supposedly among Pete Carroll's targets.
You're listening to the Emerald City Sportscast, presented by Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio. And now, here's Dan.
It's not like it really went anywhere, right? Shout out to the guys at Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio over in Woodinville. If you want to make some new music or do some voiceover work, outstanding facility there in a really beautiful area. Let's talk some football. Had a lot of fun yesterday, went on the Worldwide Sports Network on the Falco Takeaway Show and got to talk some national sports for a change. That was kind of fun. And what I really took note of this weekend as I was watching the 4 divisional games, and I'm sure a lot of you did too, is there's a lot of jealousy when you watch those games, right? But I tried to decipher and sort of boil down what this weekend's games told us about what makes a winning offense in the NFL. If we could see some clues about what the Seahawks need to do to get to where they can compete on this last weekend before the Super Bowl, ultimately that's the goal. And there were some common denominators, not just on the 4 teams that won this weekend, but really all 8 to some extent that competed. And in relation to what the Seahawks may or may not possess on this list. Elite quarterback or top 10 type quarterback in the NFL. Check. Solid defense. I'm going to say check. I think what we saw out of that Seahawks defense second half of the season was legit, was sustainable, and I think most of that personnel is going to come back. We're going to talk in the next couple of weeks about some specifics. Shaquille Griffin, whether he'll come back, Quentin Dunbar, some of those kinds of things. But I think we know that what we saw in the second half of the season, scheme-wise and talent-wise, is sustainable and for the most part will come back intact this year, presumably sort of ahead of the curve. They won't have to go through that learning process they did the first half of last season to figure out what works for them. And you can make the argument that they're a better defense than some of the defenses we saw last weekend. Certainly better than the Chiefs in a lot of ways. But on offense, what do we see? You have to have a good quarterback, first of all. You have to be balanced, and you have to be versatile. Now, the outlier there is the Kansas City Chiefs. Of all the teams playing this weekend, the Chiefs are the least balanced of any of them. Now, when they're at full strength, when Clyde Edwards-Helaire is there, they kind of use the running backs as an extension of their throwing game. They're not doing as much of that. Now, CEH out, still to be determined if he'll be playing this weekend. But you have to be balanced, versatile. You have to be able to throw it and run it effectively against good defenses. That's where the Seahawks failed at the end of this year, didn't they? And you have to be able to adjust within the game itself. It comes down to being able to scheme week in, week out against that defense you're facing, find their weaknesses, try to exploit that, where you best match up with them, attack that, be able to adjust on the fly if that's not working. But also you have to figure out a way to deal with their strength too. You can't just give in to that, right? But most importantly, within the game, you have to be able to feel the game. You have to be able to make adjustments, again, decisions on the fly. You have to figure out quickly if something's not working and know whether to abandon it completely or maybe just set it to the side, come back to it later in the game. In other words, it comes down to the coordinator, doesn't it? It comes down to the play caller. And obviously the coordinator and the play caller and the quarterback have to be on the same page. But the guy running the offense is who it comes down to. And you're seeing some of the best in the business this weekend. I know Byron Leftwich is the offensive coordinator by name in Tampa, but it's Bruce Arians. Same in Kansas City. Eric Bieniemy's the coordinator, but Andy Reid calls the plays. Brian Daboll, it's been reported he's going to stay in Buffalo for another year. Interviewed for a bunch of head coaching jobs this year. Outstanding job, not only developing Josh Allen, but coordinating that offense. And then Matt LaFleur, who I believe now is the best play caller in the game. Now, some people may still think Kyle Shanahan's that guy or Sean McVay is that guy, and maybe it's unfair that LaFleur has the best quarterback of those three. Maybe if Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay had Aaron Rodgers, they'd be in this position as well. But I think right now he's the best play caller in the game. And a little side note here, remember, this relationship didn't hit the ground running day one with tons of success. There were a lot of reports last year that Rodgers was resistant to some of the things LaFleur wanted to do, that they didn't necessarily see eye to eye. And then certainly after the draft, when they took Jordan Love in the draft in the first round, that there were some real questions about maybe this isn't working. Clearly what we've seen this year, Aaron Rodgers is going to be hands down the MVP. I believe it worked, but it took some time. And I'm not going to get in depth yet about how I'm not going to try to preach patience this year, that it might take another year. We'll get to that conversation another time. We need to find out who the guy's going to be here first. But they're all outstanding minds on offense that are still alive playing in these playoffs. They're smart. They're flexible. They all have outstanding QBs at their disposal, and they're on 100% on the same page with them. So where does the Seahawks offensive coordinator search stand at this moment? What is the latest with the Seahawks? Before we get into that, my new top three, based on names who've been eliminated or interviewed already and not been hired. Anthony Lynn's a good example of a guy that, early on there was interest. Shane Steichen as well. Doesn't sound like he's going to stay with the Chargers now. Staley's going to bring probably McConnell, I think, from L.A. to be his offensive coordinator. But those guys weren't hired. So, discussions have been had. This thing's been far-reaching. My new top three at this moment, guys that are still available and don't have, in the case of all three of these guys don't have full offensive coordinator title with play-calling duties attached. Number one is Nathaniel Hackett, offensive coordinator by title in Green Bay, but he doesn't call the plays. And so, not sure what his contract status is. Not sure how difficult it would be to get him out of that. But he would be my number one guy. He has experience in the past at a couple different stops, calling plays, being a coordinator, and now being with Matt LaFleur for the last couple of years in that system, in that offense, watching LaFleur operate and being a part of coordinating that offense and working with Aaron Rodgers. He would be my number one guy. I don't think he's available necessarily. It would probably behoove him to stay in Green Bay until maybe he gets some head coaching opportunities. But he's number one on my list. If you can get him, get him. And is he on the Seahawks radar? Who knows? You can interview assistant coaches for other jobs, head coaching jobs anyway, while they're still in the playoffs. I don't know how that works with coordinator positions. Maybe there is interest, and they're just waiting for their season to end. Number two is Alex Van Pelt. This is a guy that I'm irritated. I'm frustrated that his name hasn't come up because I just think he would be ideal. He doesn't call the plays in Cleveland because Kevin Stefanski does. He has the coordinator title, though, as Hackett does. He got to call plays week 17 when Stefanski was out with COVID, and or not week 17 in the wild card round. And he was outstanding. Balanced the way they run the football, still dynamic passing game. his work that he's done with Baker Mayfield and the strides that Mayfield showed in the second half of this season. He's a little bit older. Blue collar, has some Green Bay connections. You'd think that would appeal to Schneider, and has his roots in the West Coast offense. I don't know why Alex Van Pelt. Cleveland's done now, so he can be interviewed at will, I would think. I'm a little frustrated that he's not involved to this point, reportedly, anyway. And number 3 is still Pep Hamilton. I've called him the compromise candidate in the past. He runs West Coast principles. He's a David Shaw, worked with David Shaw, and then he was in Indianapolis with Andrew Luck, has used the fullback in the past, has a good history and a resume built on balanced offenses. And then as the quarterback coach with Steichen with the offensive coordinator title with the Chargers last year, the work he did with Herbert was outstanding. And then some of the evolution of that Chargers scheme and what we saw and how they throw the football to their backs, if that's something that he would also take with him. I think he's an outstanding candidate. And he was mentioned early in the process. It was never really reported that he was officially interviewed, but he's still out there. Those are my top 3 at this point. Where does that leave the Seahawks? Honestly, and if you know me and you've watched my show before, listened to my podcasts before, you know that I tend to be an optimist. I try to be realistic. I try to be objective, take my journalism background to heart and see all sides and try to anticipate the worst and analyze that as well and understand that what I want to be the result may not always be the result. But I think they're in trouble. I think the Seattle Seahawks, as a team that we expect to be a contender year in, year out, and have put themselves in a position of winning 10, 11, 12 games, challenging for the division title every year. I don't think that'll change next year. I'm not expecting under any scenario that this team would fall off and be a 6 or 7 win team. But I think they're in trouble. And the reason that I think there's some real red flags in this offensive coordinator search. And our buddy Bill Alfstad, who was on the show last week, just tweeted before I went on the air, hey, don't get too wound up reading what you read about this search. We don't know everything that's going on. The Seahawks have always made the right decisions. They have a good track record. Hang in there. That's where I'm trying to be, but it's really, really hard. Part of that is some news that came out this morning. We'll get to that in a second. Where I really started to turn and get concerned is when Russell Wilson had his season-ending press conference last week, Zoom call with reporters. And this was labeled, Michael Schonduger of The Athletic called it an impromptu session. This wasn't something scheduled by the team. I think it came from Russell Wilson's side. And he didn't mince words. I mean, I took it. He fired some shots at the Seahawks brain trust, Carroll and Schneider. He said he wants to be involved with the offensive coordinator search, and he thinks that that's crucial. We don't know whether he is or isn't. He wants them to be faster starting on offense. Doesn't believe they should run the football more. Says you have to run it well, but thinks they should be faster starting on offense. Thinks they should. He specifically mentioned he'd like to score 24 points in the first half. Time in, time out. Wants to throw it as much as run it. Specifically mentioned he'd like to throw 50 touchdown passes. Still thinks you can throw it versus 2 deep looks, which is what Carroll has talked so much about, was the issue going up against for that offense at the end of the year. Since his press conference, we haven't heard anything from Carroll. No rebuttals. This is a red flag. This is an issue when you look at who they've reportedly talked to about the position. If Russell Wilson was going to get his way, you would think the Mike LaFleurs, the Mike McDaniels, the Mike Kafkas of the world, those up-and-coming hot coordinators, Even a Shane Steichen would maybe qualify in that category. The other thing that's a red flag, Pete Carroll's history is he doesn't waste a lot of time. When he fired Jeremy Bates after 1 year in 2010, he hired Darrell Bevell pretty quickly and without casting a wide net. There wasn't the exhaustive search that there seems to be this time. In 2017-18, when he fired Bevell, didn't hear a lot of names. And then it was only a week or so. Again, there wasn't the reported exhaustive search, wide net. Hired Schottenheimer pretty quickly. He knew what he wanted. He went out and he got it. Now, we've heard a lot of names so far, right? Anthony Lynn, Shane Steichen, Doug Peterson, Tony Elliott, Mike Kafka, Adam Gase. And now, this morning, Kirby Wilson. Who's Kirby Wilson? Is he one of those guys I haven't heard about that's a quarterback coach somewhere, that's a hot, young, up-and-coming future head coach that's a wonderkin, the next Sean McVay? No. He is definitely not any of those things. Kirby Wilson is the running back coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. A lot of connections there. Tom Cable's on the staff. Carroll could certainly get input from him. Johnny Morton, former USC receiver, played for Carroll. I think he coached on a couple of his staffs at USC, is also there. Kirby Wilson has only been a running back coach in his entire career. I'll get a little more into his resume in just a second. He's a very respected. When it was reported by Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network this morning that the Seahawks plan to interview Wilson for their offensive coordinator position, specifically, that's how it was worded. He did mention that Kirby Wilson is one of the most respected position coaches in the league. Here's what I think is happening. I think the good candidates, the hot ones, the potential future head coach ones, the ones we want to see hired, right, aren't interested in the job because they know Pete is going to dictate play calls, even on game day, even in the moment. I think some good candidates are also wary of working with Wilson. He does have his limitations. They have to work around that. He's strong-minded. He's been outspoken about what he wants. There may be a perception out there that he's not difficult to work with, but that he's a challenge for a coordinator. And that they aren't sure that they'd be able to get on the same page as him. Or that maybe what they want to do as an offensive coordinator, their vision offensively, they don't feel like Wilson fits that or can execute that the way they want. I also think Schottenheimer quit as much as he was fired. He hasn't been linked to any other jobs. He didn't have anything on the back burner. Not exactly in high demand. And just 24 hours before he was let go, Carroll bristled at the possibility of firing Schottenheimer. Actually told reporters that the idea offended him and said he was sticking with him. And then they had a meeting. And I think what happened in that meeting is he told Schottenheimer he wanted to dial back throwing the football and go more to a run-based offense. And Schottenheimer said, I'm not willing to do that. That's a step backwards for me. And I think he said, I don't want to do that. If Schottenheimer was Carroll's guy and was willing to agree to what Carroll wanted to do offensively in 2021, he'd still be here. Just the day before, Carroll didn't want to fire him. So I think this was as much Schottenheimer's decision as Carroll's. And you know who knows that? The league. The agents. All the candidates. This is a league that is connected like a massive spider web by agents. That's where a lot of these leaks come from. So candidates are always updated on what's going on with other candidates and with how different organizations operate. Now, does that mean this cannot be fixed? That the right guy can't still be found? That that meshes with Russell Wilson, is the perfect go-between to coordinate what Carroll wants and what Wilson wants, and can make the offense successful enough that they can make the most of his talents and the talent on hand, and there's a lot of weapons there, and be a Super Bowl contender again in the next couple of years before Carroll's done and Russ's kind of window of opportunity closes? Of course not. It's not impossible. But the margin for error at this point is extremely slim, and the chances for a home run hire at this point, I fear, are slim to none. Because the guys I listed doesn't sound like they're part of the search, and the guys that we all wanted have all committed elsewhere. They can't even convince someone who's third in the pecking order, like Kafka, to leave a situation where he'll never get to call 100% of the plays, even if Bieniemy gets another job in the next couple of days. And he has been interviewed in Houston and Philadelphia. They'll elevate Kafka to the offensive coordinator title. He's not going to call plays on game day. Can't even convince a guy like that to leave a situation where he would get the title, 90% of play calling autonomy, with a head coach who wants to inject his philosophy and jump in every once in a while in the moment. And I think it's because Carroll's a defensive coach. That's the difference. When we see offensive head coaches around the league that limit their OCs, I think that still works for that coordinator a little bit better. And I think perception-wise around the league, it helps as well. I think someone like a Kafka or like a Steichen, working under Anthony Lynn, who was an offensive guy with the Chargers, Kafka in Kansas City. This would apply even to Hackett in Green Bay or Van Pelt in Cleveland. I think the perception of that person, even though they don't call plays on game day, might be a little bit more positive around the league, as opposed to someone working for a defensive coach who is telling him how he wants the offense run. It's not a great look when you're trying to advance your career, right? So, here's what I think is going to happen. I think Dave Canales is going to be the next offensive coordinator in title in Seattle. And now, rather than looking for offensive coordinator candidates, I think they're looking for a run game coordinator to work with Canales. We'll find out when he's hired. That explains the interest to me in Kirby Wilson, even though Rappaport framed it as he's going to interview for the OC position. That might not be the most inspiring thing to us all. I don't know if it is for me. Here's the background on Wilson. He's 59 years old, not a young gun, up-and-coming wonder kid. He's been a running back coach most of his entire life as a coach, except for 1 year as a wide receiver coach. That happened to be in 2009 under Carroll at USC. There's the connection. He's never called plays except on defense. Early in his career in college, 30 years ago, he was a defensive coordinator before moving to the offensive side of the ball. He has only been a running backs coach for the last 15 years, 20 years. And I don't know how inspiring it is that he had something to do with how the Raiders' running game was. As a Josh Jacobs fantasy owner, I can tell you this: they weren't as good as they should have been. What do we know about Canales? He did some high school coaching in California, and then he joined the USC staff as an assistant strength coach in 2009. Must have made a huge impression on Pete Carroll, because when he got the Seahawks job in 2010, he brought him with him, and he was wide receivers coach with the Seahawks from 2010 till 2017. Then he was elevated to quarterback coach in 2018 and 19 and became the passing game coordinator last year. So he was a part of the most successful passing offense the Hawks have had in some time, at least that first half of the season. Got off to that great start. Russ was cooking. He turned down the Vanderbilt offensive coordinator job last week. That gave me some indication that he's in line for the job. Now, why could this be a good thing? Canales is Russ's boy. They are extremely tight. If Canales gets the job, it could be an indication that a compromise is possible. He may be. I talked about Pep Hamilton being the compromise candidate. It could be Canales. He's someone that Carroll trusts. He could be the perfect bridge to install some of the offensive concepts that Russ likes, specifically the tempo. He mentioned that again, specifically in his press conference the other day. Carroll has acquiesced at times and mentioned that, that is something we could look at. You add a good run game coordinator to that, it could work. It could work. Could Mike Solari be that guy, offensive line coach? That's a dual role that's been held many times around the league. Tom Cable did that. We just don't know because we've never seen Canales call plays. We don't know what his playbook will look like. Is it more Darrell Bevel? Is it Schottenheimer? Who was his biggest influence? He didn't come up through the ranks with a mentor. It was Bevel and Schottenheimer. So, those two guys are both offensive coordinators that got fired. Had huge question marks about their schemes, especially in the passing game. Both have been accused of being overly simplistic and not very creative or diverse in their passing game. This could be one of those situations that's high risk, but maybe high reward. If it makes Russ happy, if the guy can unlock something that Schotty couldn't. Schottenheimer was brought in to keep Russell accountable, keep him straight, according to Carroll. That didn't seem to really happen. He kind of let him do whatever he wanted to do. We never heard him come out and criticize Russ, really, ever. The talent's there to compete. Maybe this could work. If not, this is it for Pete. Maybe that's why this process is taking longer than it has in the past, because he knows that. And Schneider's in on this too. We don't know to what extent, but maybe a name like Kafka was leaked by his side because that just kind of stood alone of all the names that have been leaked as a guy that doesn't seem to mesh with all the other candidates and what Carroll says he's looking for. The Kansas City offense and as highly respected as Kafka is, as young as he is. So I wonder how much Schneider and Carroll are really on the same page. I know that publicly the relationship has always been rosy, perfect marriage. I've been informed by someone that may have knowledge that it might not always be rainbows and unicorns, and even the best relationships sometimes butt heads, right? But the fact that Schneider got his extension to go 2 years beyond what a then 74-year-old Pete Carroll's will when his new contract extension expires, I think speaks a lot. I'm not saying there's a power struggle happening at the VMAC right now, but this is a bizarre search so far. And it doesn't seem like a search that has a laser focus. It feels like the kind of search where they're kind of trying to figure it out as they go along, and they have 3 cooks in the kitchen, and they can't all decide what they want to eat, let alone which recipe they want to use for that item. Maybe there's a chance they still can pull a rabbit out of the hat. Maybe they're focused on, like I said, Hackett when Green Bay is done. Maybe they're waiting to see if Bieniemy stays put in Kansas City and they can have another shot at Kafka. It doesn't look that way. At this point, I'm going to stick to my assumption that Dave Canales is going to be the next offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, for better or worse. I kind of hope I'm wrong on this one. I do think there can be a positive outcome with Canales. A lot to like about him. Michael Bumpus, the former Coug, go Cougs, but also spent some time with the Seahawks as a wide receiver, was coached by Canales, raves about him. Went on the air a couple of days ago and raved about him. So we'll see. We'll see. When we come back, we'll talk Mariners. Jerry Dipoto said a lot this week. What did he really say? We'll decipher some of that and some more good news coming out of the Mariners farm system. We're talking Mariners when we come back. Looking for a place of inspiration to record your next musical or vocal project? Why not do it in the middle of wine country? Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio is a 4-room boutique recording studio in the heart of Woodinville Tourist District on Hollywood Hill. Within walking distance of over 100 different wine, beer, and spirit tasting rooms, this peaceful setting offers a respite from the rat race of everything around it. The studio features 14-foot ceilings throughout and a large main tracking room, along with separate isolation rooms for drum tracking and vocals. Featuring a talented crew of freelance engineers and an impressive array of industry-leading equipment, my friends at Hollywood and Vine Studios can assist with your audio tracking, mixing, and mastering pursuits. To find out more or to book a session, email Kevin at hollywood-vines.com, call 206-235-8125, or visit hollywood-vines.com. If you're like me, you love animals. I mean, you love animals. And if you're looking to add a new furry friend to your family, the best way to show your love is by supporting no-kill animal adoption centers. And the best way to do that is by checking out NoKillNetwork.org. The volunteers at No Kill Network seek not only to support no-kill adoption centers, but help make a change by working with all animal shelters to change their policies and make sure every pet has the chance to find their human. And with the COVID pandemic, many of these shelters are full, and these pets need you. So check out NoKillNetwork.org for a list of no-kill shelters near you, and there's even a handy adoption pet finder tool you can use to help you find your next best friend. That's NoKillNetwork.org. Online gamers, have you checked out PSX Extreme? If not, you're missing out. PSX Extreme is a cutting-edge gaming website providing you with everything you need to know about the latest and greatest games. You'll find up-to-the-minute news about the gaming industry, as well as in-depth reviews of all the coolest games. The writing staff at PSX Extreme will also keep you informed on all the rumors about new games in development and impending releases. So if you can put down the controller just for a second, do yourself a favor and check out psxextreme.com.
You're listening to the Emerald City Sportscast, presented by Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio. And now, here's Dan.
All right, welcome back, everybody. If you're watching on the live stream or on a replay of this, I don't know if you noticed the coffee mug I was sipping out of. Pretty cool, right? This was actually an idea Jason Churchill had. He said, in honor of being the first guest ever on the show, he wanted a mug. And so I got a couple of them. One for me, one for Erica to take to work, and one for church. Let me know. Shoot me a message on YouTube or Twitter or email at emeraldcitysportscast at gmail.com. And let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. They'd probably cost, based on what my cost was, it probably cost about $10. But if you want to get your own mug, let me know and I'll make that happen. Let's talk some baseball because we're about a month away from spring training. How cool is that? And with all the crazy stuff going on in 2020, I feel like it kind of made the year feel like it went by faster, like the NFL season felt like it zoomed by. And so here we are in the second half of January, and we really haven't had, knock on wood, extreme winter weather this year. We were supposed to have La Nina. I don't see it's happened. We've had some spring-like days the last couple of days. Makes me think about baseball. And so the news is trickling out. Some cool things regarding the Mariners came out this week. Baseball America came out with their new updated top 100 prospects list. Last year, I meant to look this up. I think they had 5 or 6 on the list. This year, once again, 5. Still placed 5 players on the list despite Kyle Lewis, Evan White, Justice Sheffield graduated from last year. I think Justin Dunn might have also been in the top 100 from last year. So a couple new players moved in to take their place. And the Mariners also have 2 of the top 5. Here's how it went. Julio Rodriguez, the now 19, 20-year-old outfielder, number 3 in Baseball America's top 100, right ahead of Jared Kelenic. at number 4. Now, you heard Churchill say a couple of weeks ago on here, he has them reversed. He has Kelnick just above Rodriguez in his rankings. Says Kelnick has the slight edge in athleticism and also his hit tool. Then at 35, starting pitcher Logan Gilbert, first-round pick from 3 years ago. We'll see him at some point on the big league club this year. Emerson Hancock, first-round pick, number 6 overall from just a year ago, checks in at number 57. And another teenager, Ketel Marte, at number 73, the big young shortstop that some feel is going to end up ultimately being a third baseman. Only 8 teams in the league had 5 or more on the list. Only 3 with more than the Mariners. San Diego was 7, even after all the trades they've made. We'll get to that. Toronto and Miami was 6 each. And then BA came out yesterday with their next 10, kind of their honorable mention. And 20% of that list was Mariner farmhands. Taylor Trammell, acquired from the Padres in that trade last year for Austin Nola. And another starting pitcher, their first-round pick from a year ago, George Kirby, also on that. So really, the Mariners was 7 of Baseball America's top 110 prospects. And this gives you an idea where the Mariners can be headed, because watch what the Padres are doing. Where San Diego is where the Mariners are trending towards being in a couple of years. They were able to trade over the last 7-8 months, trade for Mike Clevenger, Yu Darvish, Blake Snell, Joe Musgrove just this week, and still, after those moves, place 7 in the top 100 and not have to touch their top prospect, starting pitcher Mackenzie Gore. That's impressive, and that's the kind of depth the Mariners are building. We haven't even mentioned Cal Raleigh, one of the top catching prospects in all of baseball. Jonathan Clase, Juan Tain, who we talked about with Jason Churchill a couple of weeks ago. Zach DeLoach, their second-round pick from last year. A host of others who will be rising up prospect lists over the next year or two. It's exciting. As for the big league club, what's happening? Between an appearance on the Hot Stove League podcast a couple of weeks ago and his appearance Monday in front of reporters, here are some of the things Dipoto said. Here are the highlights of what he's telling us about the 2021 Mariners. I thought, first of all, this was smart. He kind of walked back some comments he made after the season, where he emphatically came out and said, we plan to contend for a playoff spot in the expanded playoff field in 2021. We need to bolster the bullpen. Some young players have to step up and develop. Some young players that developed last year have to take another step forward from that, but we think contending is possible. He did. He definitely kind of walked back from that on Monday. He said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, we're going to try to contend. We're going to hope for the best. But he acknowledged that the pandemic-shortened 2020 season really affected negatively their development plans. There were a lot of young players they couldn't put eyes on and work with face-to-face. Now, you might say to yourself, well, it affected everybody in the same way. Yes, but where the Mariners are in their development in this rebuild, it may have had a little bit more of a disadvantageous effect on them. He did say they're not done adding. Don't expect any huge name signings. He did acknowledge that the market is kind of working in their favor. It was interesting. He said they're largely done. They're always looking for opportunities. He'd like to do a couple of things. I'll get specific here in a second. He tried to temper our expectations, I think, that they're going to go out and be aggressive and sign any of the big names that are still available on the free agent market. But then he also acknowledged how many names were still left on the free agent market and said that they're always looking for opportunities to add talent and players they think they can help. We know this. I think their big swing of the offseason, as far as the bullpen goes, they added some nice names, Rafael Montero and Kenyon Middleton. Brought Kendall Graveman back, converting him to the bullpen. Those are upgrades over last year. Make no mistake about that. The one big swing that they took from the beginning of the process was Blake Trinan. Now, they lost out. He went back to the Dodgers, where he's not guaranteed to be the full-time closer there. So, and he signed for 2 years, 7, 8, I think it was a 2-year, $16 million deal. So if it was just about money, we really don't know how close the Mariners were money-wise. They were trying to convince him that the situation in Seattle was best for him because he would be the full-time closer on a 1-year deal. So maybe that was the tipping point. Dodgers gave him 2 years. Maybe the Mariners were only offering 1. These details, though, come from the conversation I had with Jason. If you want to check that out, if you go to the YouTube channel, Emerald City Sportscast YouTube channel, our full conversation was about an hour and 10 minutes long. I had to cut that down to 20, 25 minutes to fit into the show that week. The night we recorded the interview the night before, shortly after we finished, news broke that Trinan signed with the Dodgers. So I had, obviously, that was part of what I cut out. But if you want to talk about it, he had knowledge of the fact that the Mariners were really working hard on Blake Trinan. There's still a chance we could get a Blake Trinan type name that's recognizable to us, that's had success at the back end of a bullpen pitching the ends of games. If we do get one of those names, it will be because the market kind of came to them. Still wanting to throw another veteran starter in the mix. He did mention that, and I thought, to me, this was the most interesting thing. I can't remember now if the Chris Flexen discussion was involved in that first show or not. If not, it's on the full interview on the YouTube channel. Dipoto acknowledged that they're sticking with the 6-man rotation, of course, but that 4 of those spots are locked down. Marco Gonzalez, Yusei Kikuchi, Justice Sheffield. We all could have picked that. And then he named Chris Flexen, the former Mets top prospect who went to the Korean baseball organization for 1 year last year and dominated. Used his curveball more. He's got a spot in that rotation. And then he says the last 2 spots will be a battle between Justin Dunn, Nick Margevicius, LJ Newsome, Logan Gilbert, potentially. At that point, I wonder if Dunn doesn't get one of those last 2 spots, will they convert him at that point to the bullpen? That's something I think we all expect to happen at some point. And then he said he really wants to add one more left-handed bat, most likely a left fielder, as a possible spot for that, but also potentially someone that could also play multiple positions. So let's talk some names, because that's the fun part, right? Always like to speculate and conjecture, because there's not a lot out there as far as reports, with the exception of this. Earlier this week, it was reported that the Mariners do have legitimate interest in Joaquin Soria, but they're one of many teams who do. So again, now money-wise, you're competing against a bunch of other teams. 37 years old now, Soria, coming off another solid year. He's been durable, which is something that I think really appeals after all the injuries they sustained in the bullpen last year, even at the age of 37. Spot Track, though, lists his market value at over $6 million a year. So that surprised me kind of based on Dipoto's comments this week. But maybe he's downplaying that, just being a negotiator. And because there are a bunch of older relievers out there that kind of fit the same mold as Soria, who might fit that profile. Shane Green, former Braves reliever. Yasmiro Petit, who's kind of bounced around but came up with the Mariners and has had a lot of success. David Robertson, Sean Doolittle, Trevor Rosenthal, former outstanding closer who's battled some injury issues. Ken Giles, Ian Kennedy had a great bounce-back year with the Royals 2 years ago. 30 saves, was an all-star, and then had some injury issues. Last year, not arm-related, though. And then there's a couple of potential interesting reunion names. Alex Colomé, I would expect him to get a closer opportunity with a clear contender at some point. He might be a little rich for the Mariners' blood, but again, this flooded, and this is tip of the iceberg. I could name 20 relievers that are kind of in this sort of group, all lumped together. So maybe Colomé's price comes down, and he chooses to get a 1-year deal somewhere, have a good year, and then kind of turn it around after the pandemic's over and things sort of return to normal financially in MLB. And David Phelps is another one, still just 32 years old, I think, fully healthy now. Never really got a chance to shine with the Mariners. He was hurt shortly after they traded for him. a couple of years ago, and but he's still out there, among others. Starting pitchers, there's still some big names that haven't signed yet. And the Mariners aren't going to be involved in that. They're not going to sign Trevor Bauer. They're not going to sign Tanaka or Odorizzi. But there are some that make sense and that might come more affordably. Pitchers looking for a bounce-back year. Again, in this down market, to try to put something together and then parlay it into another deal the next year. Or they're close to the end of their career and are just kind of looking to hang on but that still might be durable, 180-inning types that could help your rotation and really kind of be a steadying influence for some of the young arms coming up. Some of those names, Jay Happ, Rick Porcello is another possibility. Mike Fiers, outstanding for the A's the last couple of years. Mike Montgomery, could bring him back again. I think he's still just 32. And then a couple interesting ones. Taijuan Walker, would he come back for a third time? We know he loves this area. We know it was a positive experience with the organization last year before he was traded to Toronto. And we know that on his way out, as Jerry Dipoto was trading him away, said on the record, we'd love for him to consider coming back again when he's a free agent this offseason. Hasn't been anything linking them specifically to Walker. He does have some interest out there, pitched really well for the Blue Jays, looked healthy all of last year. Still a possibility. And of all these guys, he's the youngest, certainly, someone that could be a part of this rotation moving forward. And then there's Chris Archer, who 2-3 years ago was setting the world on fire and looked like one of the real dynamic young arms in baseball, and then was traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates and had a whole bunch of arm issues, shoulder issues. Those are tough to bounce back from. Not a lot of chatter out there about Chris Archer, but I wonder if he'd be intriguing to the Mariners as someone that could be a buy low, someone that they could get healthy and fix and potentially be a part of this rotation moving forward, or be someone that you can flip and get value for as a trade piece. Left-handed hitting outfielders, he said he wants a left-handed bat. He didn't really talk specifically about the type of player he's looking for. So this one was a little tougher. But there's a lot of guys out there. If you want that veteran that has kind of been there, done that, been around the block, and could help with so many of the young hitters coming up through the Mariners system, Josh Reddick, Brett Garner might make some sense. Always have loved Reddick as a player, the kind of guy that'll crash into a wall to catch a ball, real hard-nosed. I don't know if players of that ilk would want to come to a situation where they know it's only a matter of time before Jared Kelenich's going to come up and take one of those spots, and Julio Rodriguez and Zach DeLoach right behind him. And they may be looking to latch on. If they're going to take a part-time role, players like that, probably with a contender. Jock Peterson intrigues me. Lefty, not old, has some power. He's out there. I hear a lot of chatter about Nomar Mazara. He was with the White Sox last year after being traded from the Rangers, but we got to know him watching him with the Rangers against us, right, on all those bad Texas teams. Remarkably consistent as a power hitter. 20 home runs, 20 home runs, 20 home runs, and 19 home runs. Didn't get a chance for 24 straight seasons because he was traded to the White Sox, where he then had 1 home run for them. So 80 career home runs. Still just about to turn 26 is Mazara. So he might be a guy that if he feels like the at-bats will be here, at least early in the season, he could reestablish some value. Be a nice little flip candidate for the Mariners as well, but a guy who has some pop in his bat. And then another possibility that I like, because I've always liked this guy, and he's available, he's out there, and he has a history with the Mariners. Ben Gamel. Contract up, or I think he was non-tendered by the Brewers. Career .261 hitter, .331 on-base percentage, runs well. Not a great defender, but versatile, can play multiple positions, plays hard, great clubhouse guy. Wouldn't mind seeing Ben Gamel come back to Seattle. Spring reporting date still listed as TBA. Not sure what their first date is going to be. The Orioles will be the first to report February 16th. But there's a lot to be excited about. And as we get closer to the season, we are going to talk more Mariners. And we'll do a spring training, kind of a season preview here in a couple of weeks with some special guests on to talk Mariners. And there's a lot to be excited about. While I do like that Dipoto walked back on his proclamation that they're going to contend in 2021, I do think there's a chance. I think the AL West is up for grabs. I think Oakland has taken a step back, and they might not even be done losing players yet. Texas certainly going through a rebuilding process. The Angels are hard to get a read on. They're still kind of linked to Trevor Bauer. If they were to significantly upgrade their starting rotation, I would maybe make them the favorite in the AL West with Mike Trout and all those guys they have in the lineup there. But there is an opportunity in the AL West to contend. But don't let that – maybe I shouldn't even talk about that. Don't get it twisted. This is still about development, and 2021 is going to be a lot of fun to watch because we are going to find out for sure about some of the young guys, and we're going to see some of the new young guys that are in that BA Top 100 come up and make their debuts this season. Got to get some shout-outs in before we wrap things up today. Want to say hey to Jordan Van Beek. Check out his Twitch channel, twitch.tv/geekbeak. He is a contributor to the show. Really appreciate that, Jordan. Thank you for that. Kevin and Mike and the guys at Hollywood and Vine Recording Studio. Shout out to them. Miss you guys. Alex Moretti and Eric Briggs for their contributions to the advertising component of this sportscast. I'd like to thank the guys at the Worldwide Sports Network, the Falco Experience yesterday, talking some NFL football. It was fun to talk some national perspective. You can check them out on the Worldwide Sports Network, and the show's archived. Look in my Twitter feed for that if you want to watch that from yesterday. We talked about all 4 divisional games and kind of broke it down. That was a lot of fun. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Interact with me there, please. Love it. Love all the debate. Check out the YouTube channel. Really trying to build that. Views of the Brian Schottenheimer reaction episode blew past anything I've ever gotten view-wise on YouTube. Emerald City Sportscast, just search for it. Like and subscribe to that YouTube channel if you would, please. Listen to these live shows anytime you want after they air as the Emerald City Sportscast podcast on all major platforms. Subscribe there as well. We'll get these technical issues ironed out, and we'll be back live on the Emerald City Sportscast on the 365 network next week. If you have an iPhone, look for that app to be launched this week as well. Thanks, you guys. This was a lot of fun. As always, until next week, go Seahawks, go Mariners, go Cougs. I'm Dan Viennes. Thanks for listening.